I came across this photo of this team in 1956 that won the CIF championship in Coronado, and there was 3 black players out of 8 on the team, and I knew there was no bridge then. And so I was scratching my head like, how was that possible? I thought there was no black history in Coronado. And from that point onwards, I started digging more and more to find out where those players came from, and then go back further and further into the history that goes back to 1880s and discovering this incredible black community that was here from the start.
Coronado is not an island. I know it looks like one. The bridge does some of the work making it feel like one, but sometimes what's been here all along is a story the rest of the country does need to hear. I'm Laura Wilkinson Sinton, and this is Coronado is Not an Island, about local stories that connect us to the rest of the country. Black families helped build Coronado from its earliest days. Homeowners, business owners, civic leaders, Civil War veterans, and Buffalo soldiers, here since the 1880s. Their descendants never forgot them. The town did the forgetting through redlining, restrictive covenants, and a row of bulldozers. My guest today is the historian who spent years documenting these families and brought their story back into public view in partnership with people whose history this really is. He's lived a remarkable life of his own: aid work in East Africa, charter flights into war zones, co-founding the coffee house people came to call the Starbucks of Africa. But today we're here for the Coronado Black History Project. Kevin Ashley. Let's get into it. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So how did you wind up in Coronado? So let's back up. I want to hear about the war zones, how you wound up in Africa in the first place.
To be honest, it traces back to my hometown of Paris, California, in Riverside County.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, Paris has a large black population. And as a basketball player, naturally my friends were most of the black kids in town. And I just was enamored by black culture,
mm-hmm.
black music. When I ended up getting to college, I was a black a music DJ. I specialized in jazz and blues, and eventually I went back to Africa to discover where it all came from. And that's sort of what led me to Africa, was really that childhood of growing up with the black community just right around me.
Mm-hmm. So you worked for the United Nations for a couple of years. Tell me how that turned into some kind of air transport company.
Well, yeah, I'd originally hitchhiked up to the border town of Lokichogio in northern Kenya and convinced the guy at the UN to give me a job. With that, I worked for almost 2 years, in aid work, receiving airdrops. Eventually, I became the guy deciding where the airdrops went. And after 2 years working with the UN, I wanted to get closer working with the people. So I was hired to work with the community of people from the Nuba Mountains, and became their sort of advisor on relief operations. We tried to figure out how to get an air bridge to help them in the middle of northern part of Sudan, sort of a black enclave. And so in doing so, I basically met a number of people in aviation and eventually partnered with somebody and a bunch of people to buy an airplane and start an aviation business. So at that point, I quit my job as an aid worker and became a businessman, and had a aviation company in the middle of a war zone.
I was going to say South Sudan is pretty hot still to this day.
Yeah, it's still a mess, particularly Nuba Mountains as we speak. They're in the middle of a conflict there that is really devastating. They're fighting for their lives against a regime that is in Khartoum. And the same people I knew from 30 years ago are still there fighting and trying to live a life of dignity. So I haven't forgot about them.
No, that's good to know. How did you wind up in Kenya?
Well, I was a hippie backpacker, to be honest with you. I got a one-way ticket to Nairobi out of London and landed at the airport and spent 2.5 months traveling around Kenya and Uganda and fell in love with it, and came back again as a volunteer teacher. And then eventually came back and got that job with the UN in '93. So Kenya was always the base for operations and in the aid world. And so I was kind of familiar with Nairobi and so forth. So
you're familiar with Nairobi. They needed coffee shops. And you met your wife there too.
Yes, I did. So the best thing ever happened to me in Kenya was meeting my wife and us having two amazing kids. I was lucky to start businesses that succeeded. One of them was a coffee house named Java House. It grew from one coffee shop to about 60 or 70 shops over 20 years. And I was able to sell that and then sort of retire in Coronado.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. And you moved here. How old were your kids when you moved here?
13 and 12, I believe.
So how was that moving with mixed race kids to Coronado Island?
Well, to be honest with you, it was harder than I expected. Of course, we landed in June 2016 in the sort of wake, the last few months of the Obama presidency.
Right.
And 4 months later, we had a new president, which, my wife looked at me and goes, "What have we done? We should have stayed in Africa." Right.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult for our kids to adjust. They were in an international school in Nairobi that was full of kids that looked just like them. And suddenly they're in Coronado, which has like 1% to 2% of a Black student population, and fairly narrow-minded. I wouldn't say, just not very exposed. People are in a bubble in Coronado, so they weren't really that aware of Africa and so forth. So it was a bit harder for my kids to navigate, that's for sure.
They don't understand that Africa is not a country.
That's right, yeah. No one speaks African, yeah.
And there are no Black people in Africa.
Yeah.
They're just Africans.
That's right.
That's the difference. So your son played basketball. Talk to me about how you discovered the Black history in Coronado and what piqued your interest.
Yeah, so my son was a good basketball player. He was on a team when he was a sophomore that was playing for the CIF championship. I was just curious, like, when was the last time Coronado had a team playing for a CIF championship? And especially considering that my son was Black and there was another really amazing Black player on the team with him named Wayne McKinney. And then I came across this photo of this team in 1956 that won the CIF championship in Coronado. And there was 3 Black players out of 8 on the team. And, I knew there was no bridge then. Yeah. And so I was scratching my head like, how was that possible? I thought there was no Black history in Coronado.
Right.
And from that point onwards, I started digging more and more to find out where those players came from, and then go back further and further into the history that goes back to 1880s and discovering this incredible Black community that was here from the start. So it was quite eye-opening. It remains eye-opening. I discover new things all the time. I'm not necessarily a trained historian. I'm an amateur historian, but I put quite a bit of hours into being retired. You have the time to dig, which I've done. So,
and what's great is you don't know what you don't know, so you don't take the regular historian's path, and you probably discovered a lot more than the average historian would have. How did you go through land use? I mean, how did you determine this history and what happened and the families that still live in Coronado, who are the descendants of these very same families?
A lot of it's just like detective work, right? So you start you discover newspaper archives online that allow you to put search terms in. And of course, you put in the search term African American. You go back further, you put in the search term Negro. You put in the search term that I don't even want to say on camera, and things pop up.
Right.
And you find in the Coronado newspapers all these different stories and viewpoints and so forth that kind of come up. And then from there, you get a few names and you dig deeper, go into directories. There was a city directory in 88 or 89 in San Diego that included Coronado that actually had a C in parentheses for colored person across both Coronado and San Diego, which was kind of revealed a very racist system, but it also allowed you to know, oh, that person was Black, this person was Black. And so you start, finding your way through those various things, and then you broaden it to other newspapers and Ancestry.com, obviously, and things like that. And it just it's like peeling an onion. You open, you peel one back and you're like, oh my God, there's more.
Yeah.
And it never ends.
So let's talk about the families. Gus Thompson, for example, built a business on C Avenue. So give me the background on how you discovered that. And Emma, the entrepreneur and activist in her own right. I mean, how did you discover this about the Thompson families and the Ludlow families and the people who still live here too.
Well, the census information is the best because it does categorize people by race. And so I noticed this Thompson name, especially in the 1900 census. And then it's only 1,000 people in Coronado, right, around that time. So it's not a lot of people. So it's like 40 pages of census notes that you go through. And then once you have a name like Gus Thompson, you can start searching newspapers and everywhere you can. And you start learning that this guy had a business. He was actually the coachman also for E.S. Babcock, who was really the visionary who founded Coronado when it was just basically an empty island. And as the coachman for E.S. Babcock, Gus Thompson was his kind of fixer guy who would sort out all kinds of problems for him for almost 30 years. And so Gus was the first one he took the first guest up to the doors of the Hotel Del in January of 1888. But it's only later you realize this guy was a civic leader. He co-founded the Fidelity Lodge, which was the Prince Hall Freemason Lodge, which, considering 1903 or something like that, I think when they formed it, there was only the church, the Black Church, and the Black Freemasons were sort of the avenues where people could organize and meet. And so the Black Freemasons at that time were extremely influential across the country. And so he co-founded that. And then him and his wife, Emma, and Emma was also an activist herself. She was a business person as well. She ran a lunch counter at the Tent City in Coronado, which was this sort of temporary town that would appear in Coronado in the summers for about 4 months. And so she ran a lunch counter there. And but later on, she was involved in, she was one of the first women to vote in Coronado.
Really?
Yeah, as soon as they had the ability to vote, you saw her name there voting. She later was part of the statewide Colored Women's Association that was fighting for an anti-lynching bill in 1920, 21. And traveled to Europe for like 6 months and things. She was like really quite an amazing person. So their kids obviously reflected how amazing they were. And their eldest son was a World War I sort of veteran and went off and lived in the Bay Area. But their daughter was a friend of the famous architect, Los Angeles architect, Paul Williams. Right. Because Paul Williams was a tennis player. And so Edith married, she married the best tennis player in California amongst the colored community. So she became friends with Paul Williams. And then the youngest son was the first Black collegiate football star in California history. So all this amazing story about the Thompsons, and obviously you want to probably lead on to talk about this family called the Dongs and so forth. So as their kids all went out of the house, the Thompsons moved into their livery stable upstairs, which was at the time the only place a Black person could get a room or a bed in Coronado was in this livery stable that was that had a rooming house above it.
And it was above the horses' stables.
Yes, and so they took their family house and rented it out always to immigrants. It was Japanese family for a number of years, a Portuguese family, and then later on to this Chinese American family named the Dongs in 1939. And Mr. Dong was a gardener, and they raised their family in this rented house. And the Thompsons promised to sell it to them if they ever decided to sell, and they surely did in 1950, 55 or somewhere around there. And 55, I think it was. And then it was only after discovering this relationship with the Dongs that I reached out and said, I wonder if any of these Dongs are still alive. And I found Ronald Dong in San Jose. I said, are you the Dongs of Coronado? And he's like, yes, we're the Dongs of Coronado. Wow. And I said, do you remember the Thompsons? And he's like, yeah, but we could have never lived in Coronado if it wasn't for the Thompsons.
California had a very long and sad history of discrimination against Chinese and Japanese citizens.
Yes, and so the wall had already come up around that time, the Black families renting in Coronado. So the Thompsons, ironically, were part and parcel of the fabric of Coronado from like 1880s up to the 1930s.
And landowners.
And landowners and business owners and part and parcel of represented Coronado in a state Republican convention. Gus Thompson did as a voter.
Wow. That's incredible.
And suddenly Black people were suddenly not allowed to rent or buy property in Coronado from the about 1927, 28 onwards.
So that's when the curtain kind of fell down.
Yeah, that's what happened.
And World War II changed that, though, didn't it?
Well, World War II did change it. Changed a lot. So you imagine this Coronado, this Black community in Coronado, sort of fading out in the 1930s to where there was just a few families left with kids in the schools, and then suddenly World War II came and they needed Navy or federal housing projects for all the war workers, and so they built 750 apartments or dwelling units in Coronado, right where today's Tidelands Park is, and actually where the bridge actually lands in Coronado that was there as well. The federal government built federal housing there, and suddenly from only having about 50 Black folks living in Coronado, who were mostly like, domestic servants or whatever in people's houses, suddenly you had about 450 African Americans move into Coronado in this federal housing project.
In a town of about 1,200?
About 12,000 at that time.
12,000, okay.
And so, to put things in perspective, let's fast forward to 1960. I did the census work on this. There was about 300, 400 African Americans still living in the federal housing project in 1960 in Coronado. If you took if you took Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, Escondido, Vista, La Mesa, all these cities combined, which a population of 180,000 people, had only 135 Black people living in all those cities in 1960. And in Coronado, it had more than double in a population of 12,000. So there truly was a Black history and a Black community in Coronado.
Yeah.
I know now many of those families that were living there in 1950s and 60s, and they are thankful for the experience. Yeah, many of them moved on to incredible careers, and they said it was the Coronado schools that made the difference for them.
So what happened to those projects? What happened to the federal housing? Those apartments were there. Where did they go?
So it was a very funny thing. It's like the federal government gave them to the city to rent out and maintain. The federal government said, you need to get our approval to tear them down. They still tore a couple down to try to scare really a lot of the families that were in them, to scare them away and all move out so they can tear them all down. But that didn't work, and there was a big protest in the city hall. But
what year was this?
This was in 1956, like just the summer after the team won the CIF championship.
Wow.
Yeah. And so anyway, that they threatened that, but then they realized that they needed the housing because of the spillover from the Korean War and so forth. And so they kept this housing project up in about 1969, and it was only when the bridge was built and completed where finally the city said, well, you can get over the bridge now to come to work in Coronado. You don't need this federal housing project, so they tore it all down. But funny enough, that the money they made from the federal housing project as a city actually subsidized Coronado's golf course for all those years, which was quite interesting. So anyway, not the current golf course, but the previous one that was.
So we have the families. We have the Dong family, the Ludlow family. Many of these descendants still live here in Coronado and know the history, and many have moved on, but.
Well, the only ones left really is Claudia Ludlow. She technically doesn't live in Coronado, but she works in Coronado.
Sure.
She's the general manager of the Glorieta Bay Inn.
I love that place.
I know.
We have relatives who stay there all the time.
Yeah, but imagine their family left Washington, D.C. in the middle of the Red Summer of 1919 when there was rioting and murdering of Black people in the streets of D.C. and many other cities. They landed in Coronado then and raised their family in the Coronado high schools. 5 of their kids were all serving in various theaters in World War II at the same time, which there's not many families that can say that. And that was quite a great achievement by all of them. And their father was a Buffalo soldier who'd served also in the Philippines in the military. So, but most of the community's gone. I mean, you'd be shocked to know that when there was, in 1900, over 125 years ago, there was more Black families owning properties in Coronado
owning properties
in Coronado then, when the population was, I think, around 800-900 people, than today, when we have 25,000 people in Coronado.
That sounds shocking.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the impact of the real, and I know you want to get into talking about the redlining, but the impact.
I do want to talk about the real estate because the real estate industry can't be completely innocent here. I mean, I know redlining occurred in other cities. It must have occurred in Coronado too.
Yeah, so Coronado had a bit of a problem because the Black community in Coronado was everywhere. They were in every neighborhood in Coronado.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1927, the National Real Estate Board changed their code of ethics. And actually it was 1924, but the code of ethics really got put in place in Coronado in 27. And it basically said any realtor who brings in a person as undesirable into a community can lose their real estate license, which mainly meant Black people and Asian people. And so from 1927 up until the 1970s, only one Black family that I was able to confirm succeeded in buying a house in Coronado. And that family obviously was very unique. It was a guy named Emmett Rogers, who grew up in the White House, whose mother was Maggie Rogers, who was the maid for like 6 presidents. And so when the Roosevelts were visiting and Emmett Rogers and his wife were in Coronado renting, somehow miraculously they were suddenly able to buy a house after the Roosevelts left from their holiday in Coronado. So they must have pulled a few strings to allow them to buy a house. But other than that, it was basically, African Americans were persona non grata in the city of Coronado. And that, by the 1970s, this sheer economics priced people out of Coronado, right?
Sure.
But if you go back in the 1940s, literally the price of a house in Coronado and the price of a house in Chula Vista was not so different. And someone like Cynthia Hudgens, who grew up and was born here, whose grandfather and father lived in Coronado, was unable to buy a house in the 1940s because of the head realtor knew she had Black ancestry. So, yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's why Coronado has the look and feel of a white enclave, is because of those policies that were put in place really between 1920s, mid-20s, and 1970s.
All the way to the 1970s.
Yeah. I mean, we did have the Fair Housing Act that came in place in 1968, but then realtors continued to they had something called racial steering. They would steer people to where they thought they should be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, we don't really have any houses available, but if you check over in National City, I know they're selling over there, right? And so that kind of thing happened. And it's just like, it's one of those shameful parts of our history. And when people talk about generational wealth, that's how you deny people generational wealth, is the inability to buy a house in a good neighborhood and to be able to build that wealth. So instead, people were kept in sort of little enclaves or black belts where they were overcrowded, underdeveloped, and those properties obviously would lose value.
How much did a house cost in the average house in Coronado in the 40s, let's say?
If I recall, it's between 35, like the sort of Palmer houses and things that got built, which were all, by the way, all had racially exclusive language in them.
Covenants?
All the Palmer builds.
They all had covenants?
Yeah, they all had racially exclusive in the deeds. So, but those were between $3,500 and about $5,500 at that time.
$5,500.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We all want to time travel.
Oh, yeah.
And buy up blocks if we can.
Yep.
When you presented this Coronado Black History to the Coronado Real Estate Association, I know that must have been a very interesting, they were all fascinated and interested. Many of them were not alive at this time. Some may have been, but I'm kind of curious the reaction you got, because obviously the Coronado Real Estate Association is very powerful and very big.
Yeah, so you can imagine how bad my luck was. I was giving my presentation the very same day the new ruling came out from the federal government about the actual commissions that realtors could charge. And so they were actually talking about how we're going to deal with that.
They were all shell-shocked anyway.
And then I have to suddenly present right after that. But to their credit, it was a long presentation. They were all locked in the entire time. I walked them through not just the racially exclusive covenants in the real estate, but I walked them through some of the absolutely horrific racial things that happened in Coronado. There was we had in Tent City, there was a game called the African Dodger, where they threw baseballs in a carnival kind of game, Black people putting their heads through canvas holes in a tent wall where people would throw baseballs at their faces. They had battle royales where they had Black men fighting each other blindfolded in Coronado. In the 20s, we had in the Hotel Del, we had a minstrel minstrel show put on by that was sponsored by the church. The Episcopal Church sponsored it, and it was like the whole town attended. And you had all these people in blackface mimicking and making fun of African Americans. Our high schools, kids thought it was fine to be in blackface up into the 50s. So all this stuff, I had to show them all that.
It's very uncomfortable to look at. It's very uncomfortable even to hear it again today, even though I know it's true.
Yes. And so not to mention the murder of Alton Collier, which is now acknowledged as a lynching by Equal Justice Initiative and several other horrible things. So the realtors, they took all of it in. And I also did the same presentation for the Coronado Roundtable, which is primarily a conservative audience, a lot of ex-military. I had people crying in that presentation when they learned some of the battles that some of these African-American veterans were actually in. But the realtors were locked in, and I was nervous because I was telling them, this is what you did, what your organization did. And I really want to credit one particular realtor, Scott Orrick, who I think from Texas, and he's probably the most successful realtor in town. And I was expecting him, to give me a little bit of a, why are you coming in here lecturing us about stuff we had nothing to do with? But instead, he told me it was the greatest presentation he has ever seen in the real estate body's presentations, and he really thanked me for it. So, people aren't afraid of hard history. I don't know why we're erasing Black history and we want to get rid of mentions of slavery and those things. We're okay. We can handle it.
If we can look clear-eyed at it, we can be better people.
And nobody's asking for us to erase that stuff. No one's asking for that. It shouldn't be done. So anyway, I was quite happy with how the realtors approached it. I mean, obviously, it's maybe not in their position to give an apology, but I can say that the California realtors apologized in 2022 for their role in redlining. The national real estate body has done the same.
Making amends.
Yeah, but making amends is one thing, but people are, it's a lasting impact.
Yeah.
Right?
Has the Coronado entity done a formal apology for that?
No, and I think I think they'll probably follow the lead if they see other major cities doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they would not do it. I think they just, they haven't really felt the need to do it. So, I mean, I thought it was funny if I pivot, I just talk about Juneteenth because I noted that our city hall in Coronado closed City Hall on Juneteenth this year, which was amazing, but it wasn't for Juneteenth. They closed it because they wanted to ease the parking strain because of the NASCAR rally that was happening on the base. So I felt like, if we can close the City Hall on Juneteenth for NASCAR this year, maybe next year we can close it for Juneteenth.
And maybe fly the flag as well.
I mean, other cities in San Diego County are doing that. So.
Acknowledge our Black history.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's part of all of us.
That's right.
And the families that are still here, the Ludlows, the Dongs, lovely people.
Yes.
I came out at the protests on Friday mornings.
Yes, exactly.
Kevin Ashley, thank you so much for joining us. Best to your wife, Caroline.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Pleasure.
That was Kevin Ashley, the historian who documented the Black families who built this island and helped bring their story back into the open alongside their descendants. You can read these family stories for yourself at the Coronado Black History Project. And if this moved you, make sure and share it with someone in Coronado or with someone across the bridge who thinks this is only an island story, because it isn't. It's America's story. These were Americans building a life in a town that wrote them out. That's the country's story, too. Coronado is not an island, and neither are you. We'll see you next time.